Okay, I think that we'll probably just get going. I'd like to welcome you all to an RGU Knowledge Bites for Business that we are doing this time in partnership with the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Scotland. Today's webinar, Giving It Zs, Integrating Generation Z into Your Multi-Generational Workforce, will be covered by Erica Cargill. Erica is the academic strategic lead at the Aberdeen Business School at RGU, and she heads up the team, our management department team within the school that delivers business education across a wide range of undergraduate and postgraduate level courses. During her career in higher education, which has spanned 4 decades, so I'm kind of giving Erica's age away a little bit there, Erica has witnessed the transition by many thousands of students that have come through the business school into the ever-changing work environment. Her research focuses on employability and early career skills development, and the particular skill sets of Generation Z employees has become a very important strand of her research agenda. Erica is also a mum to 4 Generation Zers. She's a brave lady, and so she's constantly taking an observational approach to data collection at home. Erica's a chartered member of the CIPD and a fellow of the Higher Education Academy. Now, just to give you an overview of how the session's going to work, Erica will probably speak for around about 30 minutes, and then there will be an opportunity for you to actually ask questions. And if you go to the bottom of your screen, there is a Q&A facility, and if you would like to put your questions into that, then once Erica has finished her presentation, then I will actually ask questions that have come up on that Q&A facility. Can I please ask that all your microphones are muted and that your cameras are switched off. Please remember that anything that you type may be visible if we lift up the question and answer session. And can you also please note that we will be recording this session so that we can put it up both on our website and also the ICAS website. So those people that weren't able to join us today will be able to listen to this in their own time. So if I could hand over now to Erica.
Thanks very much, Elizabeth. A lovely introduction. I am going to qualify my 4 decades in higher education by just stating that I actually joined RGU in 1999. So fortuitously right at the end of a decade, so I can now claim that I've done 4 decades. But although my kids would probably say otherwise, I'm not quite as ancient as that makes me sound. So thanks for coming along today. I'm really keen to share with you this piece of work that started actually back at the tail end of last year, and I've been continuing with it during the COVID period because I think probably this more than anything has given researchers some really interesting opportunities to really explore subject areas in a little bit more detail. So I'm going to run through with you, first of all, just a little bit about generations, and then I'm going to focus specifically on Generation Z. So I thought I'd start off with some great news, and that is that we're all going to live for 100 years. Now, according to Professor Linda Grattan from London Business School, who has written a book called The 100-Year Life, in which she's looked at all sorts of societal aspects of living 100 years, including, of course, our working lives, what she has suggested is that those born certainly at the kind of tail end of the 20th century will live to be 100, and not only that, but our period of morbidity is also shortening. So that period at the very end of your working life, when, the very end of your life where you are a bit infirm and no longer able to live productively, that is really shortening. So the suggestion is that in terms of working life, we can work until we're in at least our mid-80s. So this is what's ahead of us. I can't see anybody in the room today, so I can't see whether there is pleasure in that or whether there is horror at the thought of having to work for 85 years. But what it does does for us in terms of exploring workforces is it really brings home to us the increasing diversity of our workforce. And I did talk in my kind of preamble to this session about Generation Z being the 5th generation to join our workforce. And if you think about these 5 generations all rubbing along against one another in the workforce, it creates some new dimensions, some new ways of looking at work, and some new challenges perhaps that we haven't necessarily encountered previously. So just to add to that little bit of preamble that Elizabeth gave you at the beginning, I just kind of looking at generational research. Now, I am a Generation Xer. I was born in the 1970s, and I will declare that up front. But that's not what defines me. And, you know, there are so many different dimensions of me and of every single one of us that will define who we are and how we operate in the workplace. And I've just given you some examples here of other ways, other lenses, if you like, of looking at me and the workforce, and you will all have your own different ways of looking at yourself and also of your workforce. So I think, you know, it's just really a reminder up front to say that generational research is one lens through which we can view our workforce, but it's certainly not the only lens. And one of the challenges, or one of the questions I quite often get asked when I'm talking about generational research is this not potentially a bit divisive, and that you're, you know, potentially being discriminatory because you're talking about particular age groups? Well, actually, quite interestingly, the generational boundaries were initially conceived with a view to not be discriminatory. So it was about being able to talk about particular groups, but without actually kind of labeling them as young, old, or you know, or any other dimension that you might come across. So this is one lens, and I just, you know, remind you of that up front. It's one lens through which you can view your workforce, but there are many others that we might like to consider as well. I go from the talk of discrimination to something political, and I don't want to be political at all here. However, I just thought it was quite interesting to sort of look at the length of a generation. And of course, I'm making a little bit of a thinly veiled reference here to the media consideration of how long a generation is, with a view to that once in a generation opportunity that those of us living in Scotland had a few years ago when we voted as to whether we wanted Scottish independence or not. Now, at that time, you know, the flag was very much around, well, a generation should be, you know, really sort of, you know, 30 years, because your children are the next generation. In terms of the generational research, that's not quite correct. And as things are progressing on, what's quite interesting about the generational research is that generations are getting shorter. At the moment, and different studies will define generations in slightly different ways, but at the moment, somewhere between 10 and 20 years is considered a generation. So it's unlikely that, let's say, my generation would parent the next generation. So Generation Y is the generation after mine. So my generation, Generation X, will parent Generation Z. So 2 generations on from us, if that makes sense. Generation Y, the next generation down from me, will parent Generation Alpha, which is the next generation that we haven't even thought about coming into the workforce yet. But that's kind of how it goes. There's a sort of jump, if you like. So I say there's not that much agreement in terms of the exact start dates and end dates, but it is clear that the gap between generations is getting shorter. And some of the predictions suggest that by the time we get into sort of 2045, 2050, we are likely to have not just 5 generations as we've got now in the workplace, but actually about 14, 15 generations. And that's down to the pace of change and the way that things are moving on so quickly for all of us. Now, you might argue that we all go through exactly the same process in life, and this is just, you know, I'm about to go all Lion King on you. You know, we're all born, we are raised, we're educated in some way, we go on to find some kind of fulfillment in our lives through partners, through families, through work, and we all age, we all ultimately retire, and we eventually die. And the suggestion is, you know, is that not the same for everyone? Why would it be different depending on which time we were actually born? Well, actually, that's not, you know, that's a little bit of a simplistic way of looking at it. And the generational research will suggest that generations are shaped by 2 key things. So first of all, the parenting that we've had, and we all, of course, look at our own parents and we take the good from that, and we also look at the less good and we say, we're going to do it better. My generation is going to do it better than they did. So that's one dimension of it. And the other dimension is, of course, the key events, the key kind of significant events and conditions that are experienced, particularly in the formative years. So when young people are in their late teens, early 20s, those are the formative years. So looking at the events that shaped society at that time will have quite a significant impact on the attitudinal focus of the generations as they grow up. So, it's important to look beyond just the fact that we go through all of these different stages. Of course, there is commonality in that, but we do go through them in all sorts of different ways, all sorts of different times, and so many, social factors and economic factors impact on the way that we view things. Now, this slide is a little bit small perhaps for you to sort of absorb every bit of detail, but it's really just to introduce these 5 generations that I've talked about. The very first generation to be named in the literature was the baby boomers, and the baby boomers were as you will no doubt have heard, these were the ones, the post-war generation, and they went through a time where everything seemed possible. So, post-war, things were, the economy was recovering, man in the moon, the swinging 60s, free availability of contraception. So, really quite a positive and economically a positive time. So that was the experience they had. In retrospect, the maturist or the traditionalists were named because it was felt at that point, actually, it's quite handy to have these kind of generational labels that we can apply. So the maturists, the traditionalists are the pre and during Second World War era, and for them it was very much a bit more of the kind of children should be seen and not heard, and there was a sort of conformist, and you were really aspiring to home ownership, and the suggestion of the name, the traditionalists, that was their approach, and those were their key events. When it comes to my generation, Generation X, and quite often when I'm talking about this, I like to do a little bit of a poll to see who we've got in the audience. I can't see who we've got in the audience today, but I am sure there are many of you there that are of the same generation as me. So we are the ones that lived through, and maybe I should get my violin at this point. We lived through Thatcherism, striking miners, the decline of British industry, the Challenger disaster in the US, Falklands War, significant rise in divorce rates. Divorce suddenly became, easily or more easily available. So Generation X was named this because the X denotes the unknown variable in mathematic terms. And this generation were considered to be the kind of lost children. It's amazing that we all made it to adulthood, to be honest. But those are the key events and conditions that surrounded Generation X in their formative years. Moving forward then, the millennial generation, 9/11, the Iraq War, the rise of terrorism. This generation is also known as Generation Y. So, the X term was picked up and moved to Y, but also often called the millennials, because those are the ones that were going through their formative years at the turn of the century. And then right up to date with Generation Z. Well, what can we say about Generation Z? This was already a generation that were exposed to the financial crisis of the early 2000s. There was this rising threat of terrorism. There is very significant world events, climate change, Me Too, the Black Lives Matter movement that's happened more recently, and now COVID has hit. So, this is a generation that perhaps has been perceived quite negatively in the press as being, the selfie generation, the I generation, it's all about me. But actually, when we look at the significant life events that have impacted on this generation's formative years, it has really created quite a number of key characteristics that we're going to look at in a little bit more detail in just a minute. So I mentioned that baby boomers were the first generation to be named. And, I suppose it begs the question, why split generations? Well, generational work was initially done with a view to marketing. So it was about dividing up the population into buckets, if you like, to be able to focus marketing messages to particular generations. And it was better to be able to talk about generations than it was to be able to say, well, we need to have this, target this product at the over 50s. It was more comfortable to be able to talk about generations. And that's really where the literature has started from. And of course, it now has applicability way beyond marketing. And what I've looked at is very much about the impact that this has on the workforce and the workplace. So down to the crunch, the key features of Generation Z. I'm going to talk through these 7 key features, which are the key themes that are coming out of the literature. And what I'll try and do is give a little bit of an update as to where we are in a post-COVID world, because some work has been done in the kind of early stages of the COVID lockdown period, kind of in the spring of this year, which has given quite an interesting dimension to some of the features that I'll talk through. So number 1 then, digital. This is a generation that have fused together physical and digital. This is not anything to do with fidgety for those of us that are from the Northeast, but this is a term that has been applied to Generation Z. Digital, as I said, a fusion of the physical and digital. Now, we all know, anybody that lived prior to the century will know that there were physical forms of just about everything that we now have digital forms of. So, some of you may have grown up reading maps in the car to get from A to B, and we now use sat-nav. We may have played with Lego as children, and we now see our kids playing with Minecraft, and just about anything that you can look at out there, any product, any service that is now a digital alternative. And it's not to say that every other generation is not aware of the digital alternative, and not to say either that they haven't adopted the digital alternative. Sat-navs are fantastic, and they have transformed the way we get from A to B, and every generation is using them. What's different about Generation Z, however, is that they see no difference between this physical world and this digital world. The two are absolutely meshed together for them, and they transcend completely seamlessly between one and another. Now, I'm going to give you an example of this, which is from my own relatively recent life. Sadly, my dad died just before lockdown, actually. And when we were preparing for his funeral, we were going through old photograph albums because we wanted to do a photo montage for the funeral. And my youngest son, who is 9, he couldn't get his head around this sort of physical photo album. And as we were looking through, he kept, I don't know if you can see, he kept kind of trying to scroll in on the photos to get a better look at who was in the photographs. And, it is just that sort of realization that actually what Generation Z do is they don't see the difference. They can't kind of get their heads around the fact that there was a physical world and there is now a digital world. To them, the whole thing is completely as one. I'm going to give you another little anecdote, and I will have to show myself as a bit, in a bit of an embarrassing light here. Last summer, remember holidays? Last summer we went on holiday to Jersey, and my daughter introduced me to Snapchat when we were on the boat to Jersey. And my son, at the time, my eldest son, was he got a summer job, so for the first time he didn't come with us on our summer holiday. So Snapchat was created. Here I was in the middle of the English Channel on a boat, and I thought, oh, how marvellous. I will take a screenshot of this and I will WhatsApp it to Rory, thinking that I was actually being quite, digitally native myself. I'll send it to Rory, my eldest, and show him where we are on our holidays. And my daughter looked at me completely open-mouthed, and she said, why on earth are you doing that? He can see on Snap Maps where you are. And I hadn't quite got my head around the fact that, here was a digital form of something, but I could, I needed to kind of physically send it on to my son. Whereas, what I hadn't realized was that, the digital world was all there for him to see exactly what I was up to. So if we think about this in terms of management practice and how we manage our employees, and I think this is probably really key to us as we move into a post-COVID world, these boundaries between the physical and digital are really going to be key to how we move forward post-COVID. And I don't know how many of you have heard being mentioned, in the kind of organisational kind of chats on which will all be in digital form, things like, oh, when we get back into the office, this will be so much easier. And actually, our Generation Z are not thinking like that, because what they're doing is they're envisaging a life beyond, which builds on what we have done during COVID. This is not, we've gone online for a few months and we'll go back into the office. And so really utilising this ability of Generation Z to not have those physical and digital boundaries really gives us the opportunity to kind of reimagine work as we go forward and reimagine this post-COVID working life, which will be very different to the one that we had previously. Every aspect of working life can obviously and has obviously embraced lots of digital enhancements. But things like recruitment and selection, where we perhaps have found it quite challenging to be doing interviews, for instance, using MS Teams, using Zoom, etc. This is not new to Generation Z. This is not something that is in any ways odd for them. It might be odd for us, those of us not that generation, to be sort of suddenly going into this virtual world and having to kind of get used to it. But none of this is unusual to them. And I can probably use the example, and anybody who's got kids who are in their teens will probably have experienced this as well, where FaceTime means that people, not within your family, are constantly in your family environment. So, your child, your teen will be on FaceTime to somebody else while they're walking about your house, and you may be sitting down to dinner and there is another person joining you for dinner because they're at the other end of the phone. And just the sort of the lack of understanding of that digital and physical space, which can be really frustrating in the home, can actually provide us with real opportunity in the workplace. There is no consideration that remote working was even a problem. Our Generation Z workforce, off they went, back into the digital environment and didn't even look back. Whereas for many others of us, we've had a bit of upskilling to do. And of course, most of us have got there in the end, but there is just no consideration that this is even a problem as we move forward. That has created sort of all forms of communication challenges for us as we've moved into the virtual world. And I just mentioned there the kind of the keep it short and sweet thing that they're often talked about as the emoji generation. But anybody who does have a teen or is a teen, perhaps you maybe get a big long message and you get one word back in a text. This is a real keeping it short and sweet generation, and communication is very different for them. So lots of implications there for management practice of this new conceptualization of the physical and digital worlds coming together. The second feature then is about hyper customization. Now, this is a generation used to customizing absolutely everything. This is a generation that want to really demonstrate their difference, if you like. In my day, you would buy a CD because you liked one or two songs. Why on earth would you buy a CD when you had like 8 songs there that you didn't want to listen to? Of course, you just make a playlist. You don't really even need to do too much browsing on the web, because cookies will pick up the things that you're interested in and will deliver them right to your door. You don't need to read through screeds of articles, because you create a flipboard and you pull together the things that you're interested in. And on the right-hand side of the screen there, we've got a queue of young people who are queuing for limited edition clothing. So, they want to be able to customize everything, and for everything that they do to be just that little bit different. And this is the time of the personal brand. So really, creating themselves as a brand and being able to kind of share and show what's very different about them. So we're seeing this as a way of our talent being very differentiated, being very individualistic, and what that means for organisations is that when our Generation Z employees join us, they want to be able to bring and share all of their skills, everything about them as a brand. So they don't want to be pigeonholed into a job description that was delivered to them, because that is the way that this job has always been done. They've come with their own set of skills, and they want to say, here is everything I can do. It maybe doesn't fit into that job description that you've given me, but let me do it for you. Now, this kind of notion of hyper customizing the workplace, I have applied to my own role, and I work, obviously within the public sector, where job descriptions and kind of formalized jobs are absolutely our bread and butter. But if we were to kind of shake that off and say, actually, we've got individuals with a whole range of skills that might be able to add to our workforce. If we, as some organisations have done, let people work with us and then let them choose their own job title that really reflects what they do, what would that job title be? And there I am an academic strategic lead. What does that mean? Well, when I was thinking about it, that means education ninja, and I am delivering education at all sorts of levels. And I thought, well, that probably defines my career a little bit more than the job title that I've got. So what Generation Z are looking for is this ability to come into the workplace and to really to give their skills. It's not about saying, here I am and I've got stuff that you should want and therefore I'm entitled. It is very much more about saying, I have got skills that actually might be useful to you and they maybe don't quite fit in. but they maybe would be of value. And that does have implications for us in terms of thinking about managing performance of staff, and in terms of customizing training, and possibly trying to tailor what we're doing. But I often use the example of, we've got lots of people who are YouTubers. They spend their lives making short videos and delivering them on YouTube. And they come into a role as a junior accountant or an engineer, and actually, why on earth would they use video editing skills? But actually, your organization might need that, and that might be really useful to you. So why should they be completely pigeonholed into the job description that's given if they have a set of skills to offer? Now, feature number three, the reality. The Generation Z are very realistic, and for very many of the reasons that I've already talked about. Their parents suffering financial hardship, COVID, of course, now, they very much realise that the future workforce is not there opening up for them to just take their pick. They are not the sort of people who will job hop if a role doesn't suit them, and they are much more loyal to organisations, and certainly that's what the research is showing. I suppose one of the other factors in there is that, if we think about this 100-year life, actually, there may be not quite so much a rush to progress within the organisation as maybe some of the earlier counterparts. So that whole kind of notion of thinking about taking your time and thinking about making the career moves at the right time for you, and perhaps building into your career periods where you do something completely different, or you career change, you take breaks. Maybe we're not needing to be in quite so much of a rush. And this, just in sort of bringing this up to date in terms of COVID, this is also the generation that have been hit hardest by unemployment, by the rise in unemployment as a result of COVID. So, this is a generation who are going to find it very difficult to recover from that. And I think, and looking back to that notion that they are also the generation that are going to really be able to help us conceptualise the future of our workforce, are they the ones that we really should be thinking, we can do without? So, realism. And just some thoughts on as an employer of Generation Z is really just sort of thinking about getting involved with Generation Z as early as you can. Many of them are still going through school experiences, and there are so many different opportunities for them post school, which might involve going to university, which might also involve other ways into work, and graduate apprenticeships, which is something that I'm very involved in, is a really good example of that. They don't necessarily have this absolute freely determined career path out there. So I think we would always encourage employers to get really involved with Generation Z as early as they can, to try and really understand what their thinking is, and being realistic in recruitment activity. There isn't a need really to sort of try and big up a job, because actually Generation Z are going to be really grateful to get into work and really keen to be able to offer what they have, the skills that they have. Feature 4 then, economies of scale, which is a kind of interesting term. The sharing economy is something that you will have heard of. This was pioneered by the millennial generation, but it's now common practice for Generation Z. So this is a generation that want to share, and they want to share not only their things, but they want to share their skills, and they don't see why others wouldn't want to share back. So, if you're in an organisation and you are an absolute hotshot at writing reports, but you're really rubbish at building Excel spreadsheets, for instance, why would you not get the person down the corridor who does have the skills in Excel to do that bit of your job, and then you can do some report writing for them? And that's a really basic example. But, again, it's coming back to that notion of sharing that was started by the millennials, but then can now find its way into the workplace. So this is a kind of one side of it, the we economy mindset. The other side of that is in terms of philanthropy, and I've got Greta Thunberg there on the slide as obviously the kind of biggest or the most well-known philanthropist, I guess, of her generation. What's quite interesting though about Greta is that actually Generation Z don't really see her as being anything particularly special. She's a voice of their generation, but they all see things in much that same way. But what they've got is that kind of realistic perspective on philanthropy. So if we think about making your social contribution within your working life, they're quite realistic, and they think to themselves, well, actually, it might not be the best thing for me to spend a day a week volunteering in a food bank or creating a community garden, because actually in my organisation I can probably generate more income from being, doing my job for that day than I can being out doing some sort of a social good. So actually, is it not more sensible for me to do that, to produce the additional income revenue within my organisation, and then for that money to pay for some sort of community-minded initiative? Now, this is quite an interesting area of movement, I would say, because I think that the perception was that when COVID came along, we might find that that this whole kind of notion of community contribution might kind of fall by the wayside. In actual fact, what we're seeing is that the research, the data that was collected in the kind of early days of COVID has actually made Generation Z feel more committed to the future, and more committed to supporting economic recovery with things like small business, supporting the recovery of the climate change. And prior to this, the view of climate change was that actually maybe we've left it a bit too late, and it's too difficult for our generation to really be able to solve this. But actually now, the more recent data being collected, and part of that is the whole slowing down of the world during the COVID era, is that actually maybe this is a problem that is not as bad as we thought, and maybe we can solve this. So implications for management practice then, this notion of sharing of skills within the organisation, really, really valuable, maybe a new way of thinking about things, but we do have to be careful not to have organizational de-skilling. If we have one person writing reports all the time, one person doing Excel all the time, then we might end up in a situation where the one person with all the skills leaves our organization, and then we're a bit in stuk. So we do have to be careful, think about organizational de-skilling. And I think that the other thing to mention is just thinking about a wider range of stakeholders in your skill sharing. So yes, it might work within your organization, but look a little bit wider than that. Maybe there are some clients that you work with that there could be some skill sharing that could benefit on both sides. And back to this whole notion that Generation Z will help companies to do good by doing well. So they won't necessarily be the ones that will be doing the good, but they will do well to be able to facilitate that good. Okay, feature 5 then is fear of missing out. And who doesn't have that a little bit? Anybody with a social media account may have an element of fear of missing out. The data on there, 40% of Gen Zs value a working Wi-Fi over a working toilet. I actually was quite surprised how low that figure was, but there you go. So fear of missing out, and this is another one that's been quite interestingly impacted by COVID. We did have a generation that were so absorbed by what was going on social media that they often struggled to see life out with, and it led to all sorts of mental health difficulties. Actually, we've had an opportunity through COVID for there to be a little bit of a step taken back from that. And the data that's been collected in the early period of COVID has actually demonstrated that stress levels have fallen during COVID. So this fear that everybody else is having a better life than you is not necessarily gone, but it's certainly relaxed quite a bit. And one of the downsides that's always talked about of the fact that young people are spending so much time on social media is that there isn't really an opportunity to become bored anymore, because there's always somebody doing something, or there's always Netflix to watch. If if there's not stuff going on your social media, that is, we're in an environment now where constant entertainment is at our fingertips at all times. So this photo may resonate with some of you. It certainly does with me, of going on family holidays, and that you just had to sit and be bored. There were just long journeys that sometimes you did have to be bored. And now you can hand a child an iPad, and well, this is going to make me sound like a bad parent, because it's not really what I do, just sort of hand my children iPads all the time. But we drove to Italy the summer before last. We could never have thought of doing that in the days of I Spy. This was facilitated by iPad. But what we have to watch out for is, are we putting young people in a situation where they can't cope with boredom? They're not used to boredom. And with the best will in the world, while we love to think that getting into working life is marvelous, actually there are some things that are just boring about working life. So especially in those early days when you're just kind of trying to get to grips with your role and with your place within an organisation. We very often hear about multitasking, and I suppose specifically about young people kind of always being interrupted by social media. And what we've seen, and certainly what the research shows, is that young people are now task switchers rather than multitaskers. So they're very good at being interrupted by something happening on their social media and then getting back to what they were doing. What they're not so good at is keeping multiple different projects on the go at any one time. So for, as managers, breaking things down into small, kind of more manageable chunks, we have to be very aware that our Generation Z are very, very quick at gathering information. They go straight to Google and they think they've learned it all. But actually they need to really think about the validity of the information that they're accessing. And, I suppose this whole kind of fake news era and being able to sort out what is fake from what is genuine. And it's something that we have to do a lot of work on with our students within the academic environment. And, from a learning and development perspective, which is, my industry, we really have to think about, how much do we engage in this, and how much do we have to, we talk about the edutainment industry, and is our role now as educators actually to entertain, or is it to educate? Feature 6 then, we're nearly there. Feature 6 is, this is the do-it-yourself generation. So a little bit like what I was just saying, this is a generation that will go to Google and they will find how to do anything, how to build a house alone, part 1. And there are only 3 parts to this series. So, you can do anything by going and finding a YouTube clip. What that has done is it's moved not only educators, but also those involved in young people's early career development from the sage on the stage, the one that kind of knew it all and that tried to tell, to the guide on the side. And, that is very much the way that universities are kind of moving education. And it is something that is certainly, very relevant also within early career development as well. And I think the reason I put the Startup Accelerator, some of you may have heard of the Startup Accelerator, but what this has also done is it's made everything seem possible for Generation Z. So it has really increased and generated an interest in entrepreneurial thinking. And that entrepreneurship is not necessarily about them going and starting a business in competition with the business that you're employing them in. It is very much more about using that entrepreneurial mindset within your organisation as entrepreneurs, or perhaps having an additional income alongside the income that they have, and it might be that you are a YouTuber and you can get, money from the number of hits that you can get, or it might be that there is some other form of service that is able to be offered. But certainly we are seeing within the university setting a real appetite for entrepreneurial thinking, and it, in terms of thinking about it as a manager and as an employer of Generation Z, it's really thinking about openness and honesty. So if people do have other ventures going on out with, and be open and honest about it, and ensure that that there is a knowledge on both sides. Supporting our Generation Z, not just to be able to find information, but to be able to filter the value of that information. And as I say, it's something that we're doing a lot of in the university setting, also something that I think, in early career development is really important. Encouraging that entrepreneurial mindset, but not being threatened by it, really just thinking about using it to the benefit of your organisation. The final feature then is Drive, and I used this photo from Top Gun, which was supposed to come out this summer, and disappointingly it didn't. But Generation Z have drive. They've come through this challenging time. They're realistic and they're driven. And we kind of often sort of laugh at the days of the non-competitive sports day. That was something that millennials were exposed to. This is not the case with Generation Z. They are driven, they are competitive, and they are out to prove themselves. And they want to do that at pace. And that pace, of course, has to be managed, and it has to be managed by us as employers. So I've talked through very quickly, and I've managed to do it within 40 minutes. Sorry, Elizabeth, I've possibly gone a little bit over, but hopefully it still leaves some time for questions. But digital, this fusion of physical and digital, hyper-customized individuals, realistic, economists with some commitment to philanthropy, fear of missing out, DIY, and driven. These are our 7 key features. I'm just going to finish on this, just kind of introduce this, I suppose, the yin and the yang of generational research, just to sort of tell you all that there is another side to this. So, of course, there is some, very significant generational work going on out there. But the other side of this is that there is a kind of feeling that all of these generations actually are kind of coming together, and there is a almost blurring of the generational boundaries. And this is maybe less important as we move forward, to have people in these kind of generational buckets, if you like. So, just some examples there where we're seeing, who would have thought that my 80-year-old mother, Elizabeth's 90-odd-year-old mother, could use Zoom and we could keep in touch through this period. We've got people living in parts of the world where there is significant poverty, but they're getting access to education from some of the best institutions in the world. Examples there of using 3D printing, very young children using 3D printing. Is there really a kind of coming together, a blurring of the boundaries of all of this generational research? And is that maybe where we're moving to? I leave you with one thing, and I hope that this will be able to be shared, but it's a fun little how Gen Z are you quiz that I would encourage you to have a look at, because you might have been hearing what I've been saying and thinking, well, yeah, I do that. That's very much the way I am. The Gen Z effect really sort of talks about, yes, the forces shaping the future of business, but also the fact that these forces are impacting on all of us, and there is a much of this blurring of generation boundaries. So have a look and see how Gen Z you are. You'll maybe surprise yourself. Right, I've made it. Thank you. Some questions.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Erica. It was very, very enlightening, actually. I have to say, I did smirk having taught my 94-year-old mother to FaceTime last weekend. She has not stopped FaceTiming everyone. And my kids, who are both Gen Zs, are absolutely sick to the death of it, saying, why on earth did you teach her to do that, Mum? But I think what's clear is, this generation, they clearly have lots to offer. And I think how we as employers can utilise their skills, both to their own advantage, but actually both to our organisational advantage, is going to be clear moving forward. Can I just please encourage those of you, if you've got any questions that you'd like to put to Erica, then please do pop them up on the Q&A. You'll find that button at the bottom of your screen that'll take you into the Q&A bit, and I will then happily pose those questions to Erica on your behalf. But just to get us started, I would quite like Erica to ask you, as a Generation Xer myself, how do you overcome some of the preconceptions that other generations have about Generation Z? And I think we've seen this really recently in COVID, that the kind of, the second wave, if you like, is all being blamed on the young people. But actually, kind of when you look at it, there's a lot of older people that are not behaving particularly well either. So
yeah, absolutely. And I think the very fact that we do have these generations kind of rubbing against one another in the workplace, there are lots of sort of points of potential conflict. One of the things that I didn't really dwell on, and I did have in my slides, is this notion of reverse mentoring. And I think that very much often, those that have been within the workplace for a long period of time think it is their role to mentor those new people coming in. And there is, of course, there's always a place for that. But I think if we can kind of flip that a bit and say, actually, we all have something maybe to learn from young people coming into the workplace, and let's sort of look at how can reverse mentoring perhaps work. Just an idea, a way of perhaps trying to kind of open the lines of communication between generations and make sure that that there is a recognition of what they can offer as well as what we can offer with more established careers behind us.
Okay, thank you. So a question from the audience here. Do you bend the rules to meet the needs of Generation Z, or should we be asking them to conform?
Well, I think that probably depends on how much you want to get out of them. And I think yes, it is a massive shift to say, let's get rid of all of our job descriptions and our hierarchy within, especially, I come from a public sector environment, and of course, that is a massive shift from where we are now. But if you look at organisations that are doing this, and Brewdog is a very good local example, where you go in there and you work for a month and then you decide on your job title, and you have by that point made your connections, and you've identified where you can best add value. And actually, I think if you did some primary data collection within that environment about how that's working, it's really, really proving to be attractive to young people looking to come in, and then certainly in terms of their retention as well, that is considered a real opportunity. But it's not going to be easy, and and there are many organisations that's going to be harder than others. So I think do you bend the rules? I don't think we want to be saying let's treat them very specially, because they're just different from everybody else, because of course then you're going to really annoy all the rest of your staff. But I do think that by having an awareness of what they have to offer, and by finding out a little bit more about what they have to offer, rather than just looking at the job description, this is what I've employed them for, therefore this is what they'll do. Communicate and find out what they can do.
Okay, thank you. Do you have any thoughts, Erica, on what Generation Z might have in the way of motivation for entering the workforce? Are they motivated by different things? And how should we then, or how should employers try and attract them to their organisation?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that in the very short term, we're probably not going to have a significant difficulty with attraction, because what we've got right now is a really difficult situation for many Gen Zers, those that are just looking to get onto career paths. And I did say that this is the sort of group that have been hardest hit by unemployment. And that's not to say that we should then be saying, oh, that's it's going to be easy, we'll just kind of pick them up, and but I think the sorts of things that they're looking for is this ability to really add value. So, if we can go out into the recruitment marketplace and be saying, we want to know all about you and we want to know what you can bring to us, I think that they will really respond to that, rather than us going, down the route of, here is the job role, do you fit it or not? What's very interesting, and it comes back to this notion of drive. They are really driven to make a difference, and I think that the media possibly have given them a little bit of a bad rap. This kind of whole entitled generation. You think just because you've been at university that you should just jump into a management role, and we've heard that over many years. I think. It's there's not a point at which that stops, but certainly I've noticed in my role, and I'm very involved in students going into graduate roles and have been for many years, but I've noticed a really big shift since the oil and gas downturn in 2014. That was really the point at which the expectations of working life changed and realism kicked in, and students became much more aware of the need to offer to employers rather than expecting them to come and get them.
Okay. This is an interesting question around the role that we as educators have in terms of working with employers to adapt employers' expectations beyond the sort of traditional employability requirements. So lots of graduate employers are looking for certain grades at university, or a certain honours classification, or grades at school. So what do you think we as educators should be doing to try and re-educate employers that there perhaps are other aspects that they should be looking for as part of their recruitment strategy?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think there's a lot of really good work going on already, and again, another thing that I wasn't really kind of I didn't have time to pick up on too much, but the whole no right path movement, which is I did talk about apprenticeships as a route into employment, but the kind of widening of the number of opportunities and the ways for young people to find their path into employment, ever increasing, and there's a lot of really good work being done with employers to try and get that message across. I think that to some extent, young people will will re-educate employers themselves, because I think, you know, once they can get in and they can then be starting to use some of the skills that they've got, I hope that will change some mindsets. But you know, it is just about trying to communicate the difference, the ways that that young people are changing, and the ways, I suppose, that education is changing to adapt to that, and hopefully the product coming out the other end is you know, also significantly changing, and that will then be visible to employers. There's a lot of good work going on, but there is also lots more work to do.
Okay, thank you. So obviously quite a, you know, sort of a lot of your talk has focused really much on like the Gen Z people, although you started off with the kind of multi-generation aspect to it. So you were talking about Gen Z being, they like the sort of guide by the side. And so how do you make that transition across the wide age range in your workforce? So this particular question is around an organisation that's trying to build in more time for the guide by the side bit within their organisation, but some workers are resenting it and see it as a waste of working hours. So how do you encourage the non-Gen Z people to actually engage in this more kind of Gen Z activity?
Yeah, and you know, there's a lot of literature around coaching and mentoring, and I have mentioned mentoring and the kind of notion of reverse mentoring. I think if an organisation has a real commitment to wanting to really make this work, then a formal programme of coaching is probably the way to make that happen. Or well, maybe I should say mentoring actually, which is more about kind of guiding career direction, because actually the whole benefit of mentoring is that the mentee is benefiting from the experience, but the mentor is also getting a lot from that. So it's really just emphasising that actually this is not wasted time, because you're going to get as much out of it as your mentee is. But you know, those sorts of things have been, organisations have tried to kind of make them happen organically. You know, go and find yourself a mentor and make that happen. And you know, there is some negativity around formal mentoring programmes, but actually, in order to get real culture change, then I think to introduce something, even if it's formal for a start, but perhaps becoming less formal, is probably the way to get that kick-started.
Okay, thank you. A question I would like to ask Erica. So I think we have multi-generational workforces, but also we increasingly have global workforces. So you've got people coming from all sorts of different geographical locations. And I was just wondering, is there a cultural dimension, do you think, or is there a cultural dimension to any of this generational research that you've engaged with? Or can we expect all Gen Zs to more or less have the same traits regardless of their geographical location?
Well, the first thing to say on that is that the majority of the research is done in the Western world, so the US, the UK. You know, in terms of the research that we've got, it would suggest that, you know, that there is a kind of Western slant to it. What I am picking up from the research is that whilst that definitely would have been the case in past generations, that you know, there would definitely have been, you know, differences geographically, it is becoming less so as time moves on. And of course, you know, we're now so fully connected worldwide through social media, but also through our you know, our global workforces, that is becoming less significant as time moves on. And you know, that's not to say that other generations will not experience the same, but it's just something that probably has always been for Generation Z. You know, there are no dividing lines to break down, whereas there are dividing lines perhaps that are being broken down by the generations before them.
Okay, thanks very much. Well, I'm very anxious of the time, and we are charging towards 3 o'clock. And I appreciate that we did say that we would definitely finish by 3. So I think on behalf of the participants, I would like to thank Erica huge amounts for actually taking the time to share your thoughts on this really, really important topic. And I am definitely going to call Erica my education ninja now for the rest. I think that's a really brilliant, apt way of describing Erica, who indeed is an education ninja and does a brilliant job at the business school. So thank you very much indeed, Erica. Thank you all for joining us today. And do please keep a lookout for our other forthcoming RGU Knowledge Business Bites for Business. Have a look on our website and also have a look on the ICAS website because there have been some excellent webinars that have been done in recent months. So thank you all very much again, and we look forward to welcoming you at future webinar events. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thanks everybody for coming.